There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more.
And they're just
There's a song, the sigh of the weary.
every setback carpet growing.
Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around heaven's door.
Well, the hedge things here, else they've gone.
I often think about Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century priest and philosopher, who said anything that you hold beyond your means, beyond your needs, anything you hold beyond your needs, I mean, you know, we hold a lot beyond our needs, is held violently.
Oh,
and I think that is a stunning statement, and very true if you look at the first world and the third world.
Do you think that justice gene comes from the working class?
No, I mean, I was a feminist as my first area of serious activism, and the women's liberation movement happened just as I was going to university, and so I got involved with that. And there's certainly still many, many things, you know, that are not happening for women that should be happening. And I know they're not happening for people who are not the dominant ethnicity in this country. So, and I feel badly about that for my friends who are not white.
Your social conscience, did that come from your parents, or did it come from something in you?
No. And the original story goes like this. My grandfather's mother lived in Shropshire. She was 17 and she walked across Shrewsbury Square and saw a public hanging. There were thousands of people watching. It was one of the last public hangings. There were thousands of people watching, and she was horrified by this is her words apparently, the bestiality of it. That people thought it was marvellous to watch her hanging. There were kids there. And that, to me, is where it all came from, and it just came from there. And remarkable, you know, when you think she was young, and then her and her husband, they immigrated to New Zealand, and my grandfather was actually, he was born just not long after they arrived in New Zealand. They lived out at Oxford, in Canterbury.
Is feminism the same feminism today as it was when you were at university?
Absolutely not, you know, it just
What's
seems to
changed?
be, because there's no activism. I mean, you can call yourself a feminist, but unless you're actually campaigning for women's rights, or, you know, something that's important to women, then you're just somebody who happens to think that, I don't know, I mean, I was reading this women's marketing and PR company, and they're saying, you know, we're just for women, by women, and I'm thinking, this is just bullshit. That's not what I care about. I care about women having equal pay and equal respect, and not being beaten up by men, and not being raped, and having reproductive rights, which are still not, you know, universal, and even in New Zealand, let alone in other parts of the world. And so if you are part of a campaign to address any of those issues, good on you, you're a feminist. And if you're not, what does it mean?
Just so in the 70s or 60s, were you a feminist? Did you know?
No, not at all, and not for a very long time. No.
So what changed?
And it's not to say. I mean, I remember how furious I was when I worked for a company called Addington Timber Company, where I worked, which was a great job. I loved it. I always loved working in offices because I'm quick and efficient, and I like being quick and efficient. And they valued me, actually. But there was a chap there who was a year younger than me, but he was male and he was earning more money. This is in the 60s, you know, and it just was like, why? Because you're a man, I mean, he was bloody useless as a job anyway. But, you know, that aspect of it always irritated me.
Is feminism something you can put on like a jacket and take off again?
No, you either are, you know, you either are somebody who is actually working for the good of women,
right,
and actually a feminist is working for the good of all.
Yeah.
I always thought that this wasn't just about white women, and it wasn't even just about women, it was about men and boys. Because if you're in an unequal society, and there's plenty of social science on this now, if you're in an unequal society, everybody suffers. So if there's big inequalities between rich and poor, the rich suffer as well as the poor. There's more violence in the society. There's less contact. There's less aroha. There's all those things, and it's pretty horrible for men who had to live the old male stereotype of being the sole breadwinner. Men are put in that position actually feel very stressed, as they would, and it's not healthy for them. And likewise, women who told, oh, you're only fit for housework, that's all you ever do, that's not good for them either. So kids growing up in a situation like that don't get good role models from either side, and the cycle perpetuates. And so the other thing is that people then think that feminism is something that is it's sort of a personal badge, that you wear certain things or you don't wear certain things, or you say certain things or you don't say certain things. It's rubbish.
But I always say to people, feminism is for the middle class. It's never gone to South Auckland or Aranui. I mean, let's be real about this. There are lots of men who still are out there working, and the wife might be at home looking after kids, or their partner might be at home looking after kids. I mean, he has control of the money, not real, some of this is really tricky territory, I think, for people to think that because I do think it's a very middle class thing.
So between the 1970s and now, what's changed?
I'm aware that a lot of people today never knew when I grew up, for the first 20 plus years of my life, there was full employment. There was a welfare state that worked. There were lots of things that were wrong. Women were discriminated against, Māori were discriminated against. There was shocking stuff going on, but there was that level of social security which, when young people today, not only are they coming into a society where there aren't real jobs or that kind of social security anymore, and the houses are so expensive you can't afford to buy them, and they're in debt because I had a debt-free education, which tertiary education, which is not possible now, and then on top of that there's climate change.
Okay, so
I kind of feel like everything's been stacked against them, and it wasn't my choice, and I get really annoyed with being called a baby boomer as though I'm responsible for it all. I am not. David Cagle, a baby boomer, is responsible for it, and that generation, Jeffrey Palmer, is responsible for it, not me, because I was on the other side all through it all, and I never wanted it to happen, and I do what I can now for younger people to help them both financially and practically, and just so that they don't suffer as a result of actions that were taken by other people, which I disagreed with at the time.
I think every politician should have to read the Spirit level. It looks at the gap between the rich and the poor, and the bigger the gap, the more teenage pregnancy, the more prisons, the more people in prison, the more poverty, the more housing issues, and it goes on and on like that. It's not that there is a gap, it's the size of the gap.
Okay.
And I just think, no, don't tell me that Labour haven't been able to do the things they should have done. The day before Dann, who's regarded so highly by so many as a hope for this country, before she got in as the Prime Minister, she said she had got into politics because of child poverty. In a very short space of time, having become the Prime Minister, she announced she's going to halve child poverty in 10 years. Well, I was horrified. Her child is never going to be in that position. How can you possibly say to kids, no, in 10 years you've got a 50-50 chance of still being in poverty? This is absolutely wrong. We can do something, we're afraid to. Their focus groups will be telling them that nobody wants to increase benefits, that the middle class are opposed to moving the benefit up. So that's what they do. My God.
Yeah. The Greens came out of the Values Party. Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Yeah, she was the energy spokesperson in the 1978 election campaign.
And Rod Donald.
And Rod Donald had campaigned for He'd never stood as a candidate, but he had been a member and he'd helped in other people's campaigns. He cycled all the way to Nelson to help a candidate in the by-election there when he was a teenager.
Did he want to be in politics?
Oh, absolutely. He always wanted, but it was getting the electoral reform to make it possible. And once he'd achieved that, then it was a matter of like which party. And he and I remember us meeting on the corner of, was it Gloucester Street and Oxford Terrace, and having a discussion about that. And I said, really, Rod, you have only one choice, and it's the Greens. And a year later, he was the co-leader.
I mean, I first met Rod when actually I worked for Trade Aid at the headquarters for 14 years. And it was the first job I had. My youngest daughter was 4, and it was absolutely wonderful. I just learnt an enormous amount. I had never heard of John Pilger. And it was 1986. Well, you know, somebody said, oh, he wrote this book called Heroes. My God. After I'd read the book Heroes, I wrote to him and he wrote back to me, which was really lovely.
Yeah. If Rod was alive today, how would he feel about the state of the left-wing politics in this country?
I think he'd be appalled.
Okay, so what would he do differently? What would he do?
Rod would have been strong on free public transport. I think we have to have that, and we ought to have it. Free and frequent, regular public transport. Smaller buses, going different routes, picking up people. More people will go into town. They want people to go into town. Even if they're only having a cup of coffee, it's keeping some place alive. So yes, I think he'd be hot on that. And I think he'd be hot on the whole issue around coal and, you know, places continuing to be trying to find oil off our coast. I mean, this is filthy stuff. I mean, you know, there isn't much that that Greenpeace do that I don't agree with. I don't think there's anything. I think they're on the track.
Greenpeace?
Yes.
Yeah, well, so Russell Norman, he had to get out of Parliament to be able to do that, didn't
yes,
he?
He did.
So he was constrained. So
Yes, I think everybody who goes in there, like, you know, John Minto stood for the Mana Party, and I said to him at the time, you will hate it.
Did Rod make compromises?
Yes, but he didn't. He never compromised anything important. He would compromise tactically, but he would never compromise strategically. So, for instance, he always stood for fair trade, and he was never going to compromise that. And so it was like, when I was working for him, I'm writing submissions on the free trade agreement with Singapore and the free trade agreement with China and the free trade agreement with Thailand, opposing them all. And then when some Chinese head honcho was coming out, and he stands on the forecourt of Parliament holding the Tibetan flag, and so the Chinese head honcho has to go in the back door rather than past the guy holding.
That was under Jenny Shipley in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably was.
What would he have made of Jane Kelsey?
Oh, I mean, he knew Jane Kelsey, and he knew all the Kafka, the campaign against foreign control. And of course he worked for Trade Aid. Yeah. So it was, I mean, he was their representative in Parliament, effectively, which is what I was saying earlier, that I don't think you can be a successful MP for a party which purports to stand for something other than naked self-interest, unless you actually have a constituency of interest to whom you are still connected and accountable. Explain
the constituency of interest.
So when you're a electorate MP, you're supposed to represent the people in your electorate of all, ages and colours and stripes and whatever they are, and the interests of that particular geographical space. When you're a list MP, you can either just go in to make weight for your party and do whatever you want, or you can say, I am here to represent feminists or women's rights or fair trade or peace and justice and so on and so forth, or edible food, organics or whatever you're representing. And then if you stay in contact with those people, if you come out of that movement, as Rod did with the fair trade and also with the democracy movement, and if you stay in constant contact with them, so they keep you honest and they say, how are you getting on? You have a meet-up with the Campaign Against Foreign and Jane Kelsey and whoever. You host meetings where you have those people speaking and so on. And
so what's the difference? What's changed?
What's changed is that with the Green Party, what's changed, and also this changed with the Labour Party. It was like, well, most of the Labour people now no longer have any connection with workers or unions, and they've never run a campaign, and they've never actually sat around in a group and had to talk things through with people, and they don't have anybody they're answerable to. The electorate MPs go back to their electorate, but the list MPs are just can do what they like, literally.
Are you saying that that you and your cohorts planted the trees and now they're picking the fruit? They haven't done the weeding and the hard work? Is that what it is?
No, what I'm saying is there's been a generation change, as inevitably there has to be, but without an understanding of the fact that if you do that and you don't pick the next crop of activists, and there was a next crop of activists, you know, they were active on different things. So I'm not... but I think that if you select people on the basis that they're photogenic and they speak nicely and they go on the cover of Metro, it's rubbish.
All right,
so it's total rubbish. And that is basically, I went to the 2017 candidate selection conference for the Green Party. I did not find anybody who had a great activist track record, and I did not find anybody who seemed to have experience or knowledge in the important portfolios. Finance, health, education, the ones that make the most difference to other people's lives.
Because what we need, I always think that anybody going into Parliament, especially if you're in the Greens, which I used to be a member of, you have to, I think you should have to have been part of a grassroots movement. I don't want people going in there who've had corporate jobs, like James Shaw, he worked for Coca-Cola at one stage.
Oh,
well, you know, to me this is I don't mind that he worked for Coca-Cola because he was young and silly. Well, in actual fact, he joined the party when he was 16 or something. But I do mind that he has done no, what I would call, activist work at grassroots level. You know, I sometimes say to John, well, I think some of them should have to live out in South Auckland. To find out the grind that people... Perhaps we'll have more identity. You know, the Labour Party has all these years had the votes of those three Incredi, Manukau, Mangere, Manurewa, I think it is. Those three, they're the poorest seats in the country. What have they ever done for those people? No, they swan out there during election times. They had that guy Ross, who for 20 years he was in Parliament. He never did anything, ever. But he sat in the back pews, and that was good because he kept his gob shut, and so the Labour Party just dragged in those votes. He was the patron of every damn sporting organisation in his electorate. That's all he ever did.
So you can have as many bloody international lawyers as you like. That affects what? 0.00 something 1% of New Zealanders. Yeah. Some unfortunate refugees and asylum seekers. It's not mainstream. Okay. And so again, it's like, if you haven't, I think that, you know, the Greens, since Sue Kedgley left, the Greens have stopped campaigning on food issues in any serious way, and food affects everybody, and actually having, you know, campaigns against pesticides are really important with bees and other insects dying and so on.
Well, on their side, are they afraid to campaign because if they get too rough and noisy, Winston might jump his waka into the...
No, they're not afraid to campaign, they just don't know, they've never done it, so why would you, you know, James Shaw worked for international business, for Shell and Hong Kong Bank.
Is that why he appointed Rod Carr to head the climate change?
Probably. He feels comfortable in a business and with people with suits and ties. He's a suit and tie man, he's never been an activist, never.
When John Key was in power and there were people living in cars at that time, I said to John, what we really need is we need 100 people.
Wait, you said to which John is this? Not John Key.
Sorry, I said to John Minto. Yeah. I said to John Minto, I said, we need 100 people in cars to park up outside John Key's posh $8 million house or whatever it was. And somebody said, oh, but you just get moved on. I said, it's quite hard at midnight to move on 100 cars when the whole world would be watching.
Yeah.
Because that to me is the ultimate, to get the whole world to see that we have these dire situations in a country that is actually very wealthy. And they can do things. They've found all that money for the military. I mean, no doubt an agreement they made with New Zealand First, but that's just appalling. The military machine has got all that money, and we've got people living in cars. No. We've got our priorities totally wrong, you know.
My thing is, you know, like with my political scientist hat on, I say, what is it that keeps a party honest to its principles? And if that party went in there coming from activist campaigns and seeking to have change, and those people are replaced by the next cohort, none of whom have ever been part of an activist campaign seeking change, and who do not have any connections back to activist campaigns seeking change, then they will just, you know, it's just business as usual, it's just playing parliamentary games. That's why you can get the deputy, you know, the Assistant Minister of Environment ticking off selling water to a Chinese company to put into plastic bottles and export. It's not green policy.
Yeah.
No way is that green policy.
What should she have done?
There's lots of things you can do when your officials tell you should do something if you're a minister. And the first one is kick it for touch. I mean, if you don't want to cause a fuss. You just say, oh, okay, that's what you say, I'd like a second opinion. And if you don't like that opinion, you get a third opinion. And like as Groucho Marx says, these are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. and you know, that's the first thing you do.
Yeah.
The second thing you do, if you are connected with a campaigning organisation, is you tell them to kick up merry hell and say, I can't do this, it will be political suicide for me. And then you call up your mates and you say, could you please turn up on the steps of Parliament and hold a very rowdy protest about this tomorrow? And they go, sure, anything to oblige.
Okay, well, in the day, we used to be able to ring up Rod Donald. In the middle of a committee meeting, he'd walk out, he'd take the call, and he'd say, do you want me to turn up? There was a connection. We were joined to the guys up there.
Yeah.
And what I feel now is there's no joining, there's no connection at all with Eugenie and her mates up there. We can't talk to them. We can't find. Everybody I know says we've lost them.
Yeah, you have.
Why didn't you go to Parliament yourself? Why didn't you run to
I hate
Parliament?
it. I think it's a terrible job. It's like, it has those. It's like 50% boredom and 50% stress.
Are you like one of those people who study the white leopard of Nepal, but you don't actually want to be in the cage with one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, well, no, it's just that the actual job itself. You know, I worked for a union and I went through negotiations, and so I know what it's like to be in a situation where you're trying to get somewhere with people on the other side, and you have to go through the motions of polite debate and discussion, and all the while I'm feeling, I can't do it because I get too emotional. I just know that clerical worker is trying to feed her family on a wage which is far too low, and these bastards who run the hotels where she's employed are fat cats, you know? So I'm not good at that kind of work. Working with Rod, I used to say, well, I make the bullets and he fires them. So I'm the backroom girl, I do the research. He was very easy to brief, you know, because he learned orally. You know, you could just tell him something and he would stay.
Yeah,
and so he is a very strategic thinker, and we both thought the same way in terms of where does power reside and how do we attack it.
In your view, what makes a good leader?
A good leader listens, and a good leader expresses, you know, what people are thinking, and a good green leader is in all the things that you said. That Rod, you could call him up in a committee meeting, he'd come out and he'd say, what can I do for you? That's leadership.
That's leadership.
Yeah.
And we trusted him for that, and we would walk over burning coals for him for that.
Yes.
And
Jeanette had a different style, but again, you could always trust her, and she would be probably less, you know, less extroverted and forthcoming than Rod, but if you went to her with a serious proposition and said, you know, can you help with this, you would get her full consideration, and she would, you know, go through it with you and let you know what was or was not possible. And she would do, her Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, she got that through a hostile parliament. It's amazing what that first caucus got through in, hostile parliaments. So, and it really upsets me to have James Shaw sort of dissing all the previous and saying, oh, no, now we've got ministers, we're doing stuff that they couldn't do or they didn't do. Rubbish. And the zero carbon amendment was zero carbon by I don't think so. 2050, come on, with Rod Carr in charge, doubt it.
Well, could you say that it's almost a tribal thing? That when we look outside our country, outside our own boundaries, we just don't care? Isn't that natural?
Oh no, I don't think it's natural at all. I think
Well,
it's appalling.
there's a sign at the side of the road on the way to Amberley. I passed on the way and it said, violence is never okay. I want to write underneath, except in Afghanistan.
Yes, of course. I totally understand that. I mean, war is never okay. I've got a book sitting over there, No More War, which my grandfather, my mother's family were very strong. All my mother's one was one of 10. They were all opposed to conscription. They were all, well, some of them went into hiding during the war, Second World War, but they were all opposed to all that sort of stuff. And that book, I don't know, it's from about 1910, which has my grandfather's signature in it, and he was called the little communist.
What happened to them? Were they imprisoned?
No, the only one that was imprisoned was my mother, because she stood up, at Pigeon Park in Wellington, and she knew, she was 24 or 26, she knew she would be arrested.
Yeah.
So it was a deliberate move on her half, and she stood up on a box, and the young constable who knew he would have to arrest her said, look, please, Miss Jones, please, don't do this. And she got up and it was about telling people not to allow themselves to go to war, and it was illegal. I mean, outrageous, but it was illegal.
When she was married, did she let herself get arrested again?
Oh yes, but not really till 1981.
And that was the Springbok too?
Yes, so we were all arrested. I mean, I shared a cell with my mother, both my sisters and my sister-in-law. Fantastic. And down the corridor was my father and 2 of my brothers and my ex-husband. Well, I think when you get a mass movement like that, to me, I learnt so much from all of that. I learnt partly about how you're treated by the police. I learnt so much by going to court. I'd never been into court before. And it's an interesting sort of power play in my view, and being arrested for obstruction of carriageway. I didn't know what a carriageway was, but it was it was all a bit But there's a lot of bonding goes on. I mean, almost all of our friends I have known since then. Really, they are people who've stood up for things that are right.
That interests me. When we look at a family or a community, where we live in the country, we're surrounded by farmers, and years ago we'd have a barn dance and everybody from the valley would come. Now that we've taken a stand against the water issues, a lot of farmers won't come. That's okay. But there's another angle to it. We've discovered a family which is wide and covers the whole country. And when we've been involved with politics, suddenly somebody will ring and say, can you come and talk here, there, wherever. And they become friends, and they are the family we've earned. We haven't just been given them.
No, I agree with you, absolutely. I mean, I see this for the people in Prebbleton who are complaining about the latest development there, and I just think, why is it that communities are not permitted to decide amongst themselves whether they'll have the latest liquor outlet, whether they'll have the latest fast food joint, whether they'll have pokies in the community? Why shouldn't communities make those decisions? I have a son who lives in Stoke Newington in London. They're deeply opposed to having fast food outlets. They have one. But they have all these wonderful eateries from the Middle East and everywhere else. Locally owned, beautiful food. They do not have McDonald's. I just don't think this is right, that they can plonk themselves anywhere. But they are the ones with the might. They have the money. Now, in something recently, and that might have been the water issue actually, 70,000 had to be raised. Well, that's not the job of communities to raise that sort of money.
Oh, you mean to go to court?
To fight the bastards off.
Yeah. So why can't the council say no to that? in this country?
Oh, well, I think you'll find that the bylaws don't allow them to say no. So they have to, they are the ones, they never will, but they are the ones that need to be going, with the backing of the community, to government saying, we need these laws changed for local government.
Right.
You know, I live in the community, not the man who owns the bloody liquor outlet. He doesn't live here, or the person with all the poking machines is raking off the money for it. No, I think it's all outrageous, all that stuff.
And think of all the energy you've put into activism over all these years. Have you had enough wins to make it worthwhile?
I think it's worthwhile so long as I'm alive.
Okay.
And I think that if I'm not still going on protests when I'm 85, I might as well be dead. I think I have a responsibility as a human being. I think everyone as a human being has a responsibility
To earn
everyone.
To earn their place?
No, it's not about earning their place. It's just, I think, you know, we're born on this planet. I'm born in particularly fortunate circumstances because I'm born in Aotearoa. That itself is a privilege as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the world.
The neighbours keep bees that way, and also Guy breeds queen bees at the
No more many days.